Hello everyone. Welcome to the second video in our series on the modern history of India for UPSC Prelims. Before we dive into the events of the Indian national movement, we must understand the lens through which we view them. This is what we call historiography. In simple terms, history is not just a collection of dates and names. Historiography is the study of how history is written, the interpretation, the analysis, and the belief systems of the historians. As a UPSC aspirant, you must recognize that a British officer and an Indian freedom fighter would look at the 1857 revolt very differently. One sees a mutiny, the other sees a war of independence. That difference in perspective is what we are studying today. The colonial approach. The earliest systematic records of Indian history were written by British officials. This is the colonial approach, and it serves two main purposes. First, it is the history of colonial countries from a European perspective. Second, and more importantly, it was an ideological tool used to justify British rule. Historians like James Mill, Mount Stuart Elphinstone, and Vincent Smith represented India as an Oriental society, one that was stagnant, primitive, and incapable of self-rule. They popularized three specific myths. 1. The myth of unity. They claimed that India was a collection of warring tribes and that only the British brought political unity. 2. Social Darwinism. They believed the English were biologically and culturally superior, destined to rule the lesser races. And 3. Pax Britannica. They argued that British rule brought a white man's peace to a chaotic society. In their eyes, colonialism wasn't exploitation, it was a civilizing mission. The nationalist approach. In the late 19th century, Indian scholars began to push back. This gave birth to the nationalist approach. This wasn't just about pride, it was a scientific confrontation of colonial lies. First, the economic critique. Leaders like Dadabhai Navroji, Ranade, and Gokhale didn't just give speeches, they used data to show the drain of wealth. They proved that the British weren't developing India but were bleeding it dry. Second, cultural identity. Scholars like Sri Aurobindo, notably in Deshar Katha, used history to create a sense of national unity, reminding Indians of their heritage to spark the desire for Swaraj. The Marxist approach. Then comes the Marxist school. Marxists look at history through the lens of class struggle. For them, the primary contradiction in modern India was the conflict between the interests of the British colonial masters and the Indian people as a whole. Key works here include Rajni Pamdat's India Today, which analyzed the stages of British imperialism, and A.R. Desai's Social Background of Indian Nationalism, which argued that the rise of nationalism was a result of the new social classes like the bourgeoisie created by the British economic system. The subaltern approach. In the 1980s, a new school emerged, the subaltern approach. These historians argued that both colonial and nationalist histories were elitist. They focused only on governor-generals or top-tier Congress leaders. The subaltern school focuses on history from below, the peasants, the tribals, and the marginalized, who fought their own battles against both British rule and local landlords. They highlight the internal contradictions within Indian society that the nationalist narrative often ignored. Other critical approaches. 1. The communal approach. This school interprets Indian history through the lens of religion. It views Hindus and Muslims as two permanently hostile blocs. This narrative was often encouraged by the British to divide and rule, and was later used by communal organizations to justify the partition. 2. The Cambridge School. This school takes a cynical view. Historians here argued that there was no real nationalist feeling. Instead, they claim Indian leaders were driven by animal politics, a simple quest for power and local influence. To them, the freedom struggle was just a competition between Indian elites for the rewards the British were offering. 3. Liberal and neoliberal approach. Led by figures like Patrick O'Brien, this school questions the economic benefit of the empire. They argue that the British taxpayer actually lost money on the colonies and that investment in India was a bad deal for Britain. This tries to downplay the narrative of deliberate colonial exploitation. 4. The feminist approach. Finally, the feminist approach emerged after the 1970s. It critiques how women were ignored in traditional history. It looks at the ownership of resources and how colonial laws affected women's vulnerability. Pandita Ramabai's The High Caste Hindu Woman is a foundational text here, exposing the double oppression of patriarchy and colonialism. They also critique Western perspectives, like Catherine Mayo's Mother India, which often use the plight of Indian women as a tool to justify British intervention. Conclusion. As you prepare for the UPSC, remember, a historian's background shapes the history you read. Understanding these approaches allows you to write balanced, analytical answers in the mains exam. This completes our deep dive into the major approaches to the history of modern India. Understanding these frameworks is the foundation of your UPSC preparation, as it helps you look beyond the facts and analyze the underlying motives of historical narratives. In our next session, we will put these theories into practice. Having covered the sources in our previous video and the approaches today, we will finally begin the chronological journey of modern India, starting with the advent of Europeans. Keep your notes ready, and we will meet in the next lesson of the Project Taakif Modern History of India series. If you found this strategic overview helpful, please like, subscribe, and share this journey with your fellow aspirants. If you have any questions regarding these historiographies, drop a comment below. I will be personally addressing your doubts to ensure your conceptual clarity is absolute. Regarding structured notes and comprehensive study material, stay tuned as I will be sharing exciting updates on how to access them in our upcoming videos. Finally, as a thank you for joining Project Taakif at the very beginning, there will be a special reward for our early subscribers to aid in your UPSC preparation. Until then, keep learning, keep analyzing, and stay focused. Jai Hind.